So first disclosures, the two to pay attention would be GW Pharma and Insys Therapeutics. These are two companies that are trying to bring cannabidiol to market. The rest are all companies that are developing products for infantile spasms. Some basics. Epilepsy is pretty common. It affects about 1% to 2% of the population. The current state of the art is that about 2/3 of patients are fully controlled with available medications, but 1/3 are not. And when a lot of folks who are not already indoctrinated into the epilepsy world think of seizures, they think of things like this.
Oh, sorry, Bella.
So this is a generalized tonic-clonic seizure. These tend to last 30 seconds to 90 seconds. They're pretty obvious. Not all seizures are so obvious. Okay, so that little 1 to 2 second movement is an infantile spasm or an epileptic spasm. And these seizures are considerably more subtle than the last video I showed you, but the consequences of these seizures are profound. Unfortunately, folks with DUP15Q are enriched for incidents of infantile spasms. One of the reasons why this form of epilepsy is devastating is because of this. So this is a screenshot of a pattern called hypsarrhythmia. It's pretty chaotic. It's hard to make sense of this. The clinical rule of thumb is that if you turn the EEG upside down and you can't tell that it's been turned upside down, it's probably hypsarrhythmia. And this picture has been turned upside down. And if you compare it side by side with a normal EEG, it's pretty obvious that there's a big difference in voltage, organization, but I won't belabor the point. The best case scenario when it comes to infantile spasms is that you can be normal. If you stop seizures promptly, if you stop hypsarrhythmia promptly, there is hope for normal outcome as long as the underlying cause of infantile spasms is something relatively benign.
Sean, can you go a little bit closer to the microphone?
Sure.
Thank you.
The worst case scenario, by contrast, is that every function that we think of can be compromised. And beyond cognitive harm, there is increased risk of autism with infantile spasms and other forms of epileptic encephalopathy, lifelong seizures that are hard to control, even risk of death. And if I can't appeal to you on a scientific or compassionate basis, let me appeal to your wallet. When you fail to stop infantile spasms, the lifetime costs of medical care, supervision, and support are approximately $7 million per year in 2015 dollars. And when you look at the impact on caregivers and family in terms of parental employment or underemployment, productivity, parental use of healthcare utilization, it turns out that parents of children with epilepsy tend to use more healthcare than the other parents, and that it tends not to be seeing their physician more often, it's that they are showing up in the ER more often or showing up in mental health care settings more often. We don't yet know what those diagnoses are, but we're tracking it down and we suspect that this is stress-related illness. And when you sum up all of those costs in the United States for epilepsy, it's about 23 billion per year. So this is important. The treatment options for many forms of epileptic encephalopathy are pretty limited, and when you look at infantile spasms, the menu looks like this. There are no appetizers, sides, or desserts, 2 main courses, and when you zero in on these 2 main courses, these are ACTH and vigabatrin. The efficacy is less than we would like. Side effects are pretty imposing. If you can imagine being a parent and being told that the 2 medications that work pretty well carry risk of immune suppression, which can even be lethal, hypertension, which can lead to heart failure, or vision loss, which is irreversible. It's pretty hard to stomach these. And the cost is staggering. So this is per patient, per treatment course, $150,000 and $60,000. Not cheap. Now, if you're a parent looking at these side effects, let me fast forward through this, actually. This is the most important slide, I'd say. For the risk of a lot of medications available for infantile spasms, the biggest risk of all of these things is that they won't work. And those odds are pretty darn high. So, considering these 2 options, wouldn't it be nice if there was a third drug that had high efficacy, no terrible side effects, and didn't carry a 5 to 6 figure price tag? I'd say sure. And maybe it's cannabis. Okay, so we'll go through some cannabis basics quickly. There are two species. They look a little bit different. One is tall and skinny, one's short and stout. We are not talking about joints or blunts or edibles. And when we think about medical marijuana, we often imagine places that look like this, kind of shady back alley sorts of establishments. But they actually look like this. This is Venice. And they increasingly look like this. So much higher end, catering to a more sophisticated, wealthier clientele. And what you don't see here is the armed guard or guards, because medical marijuana and recreational marijuana is still a cash-only business, because it's still federally legal, and because our banking system is federally regulated. You can't deposit medical marijuana or recreational marijuana profits in banks. Okay, so it's all transported cash-only. The history of cannabis is complicated, but it probably started with wild-type plants first appearing in what is now China, spread to the West thousands of years later. And over time, the first medical use is purported to have occurred in about 3000 BC in China for a variety of advertised causes. The first use for something that might have been epilepsy was in the Middle East in about 1000 AD. It came to the West in the 1800s, used largely as an analgesic. And today it is, of course, useful for everything if you read the internet. Medical and recreational marijuana is going to be legal in California in 2018. So we've already passed that referendum, but it hasn't gone into action yet. These slides are outdated, but the country is getting greener. And the message is that there are provisions that are highly heterogeneous that allow either medical or recreational marijuana use, or that allow specific use of cannabidiol-enriched products. We'll talk about what those are. There are only a couple states in which it is state illegal to use any medical marijuana product, but it's still federally illegal everywhere. Okay, so in most states there are conflicting legislation. When you look internationally, there are certainly a few countries where there is medical use allowed. There is only one place supposedly where it's legal, and that is apparently North Korea here. I'm pretty sure this is Dennis Rodman diplomacy, if this is actually true. Okay, things really started changing around 2013. So marijuana is not new, but our interest in its use in epilepsy is relatively new. And Sanjay Gupta, in a trio of documentaries in 2013 and 14, changed his mind. And what did he do? He profiled a lot of people who were using marijuana for medical purposes, including this young girl. Her name is Charlotte Feige. And she has a form of epilepsy called Dravet syndrome, which is a severe form, at least a potentially very severe form of epileptic encephalopathy. And she did amazingly well with this product. It later bore her name. It is now known as Charlotte's Web, made by this photogenic band of brothers. And they are the face of the Realm of Caring and CW Botanicals. And they produce this product. So this is a cannabidiol or CBD-enriched cannabis extract. You can buy this online. You don't need a prescription. You don't even need a physician recommendation. There are many other products online that are similar, many that are low quality. You can get it on Amazon. There are some products that resemble candy. This one looks a little bit like a Tootsie Roll. Okay, so when we talk about the key cannabinoids out there, most people think of delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol. So this is THC. This is the one we usually think of and link to the typical effects of marijuana, including the high or euphoria, hunger, antiemetic properties, paranoia, unmasking of latent psychosis, the so-called amotivational syndrome. Then there's cannabidiol, or CBD, and this doesn't have any of those effects. It has potential as an anti-seizure medication. It may be sedating in high doses. It may cause anorexia. When you ask marijuana aficionados how good their CBD-enriched marijuana is, they say that it's not very good. These kids are not getting high. Adults who are using cannabidiol-enriched products are not getting high. These are the two, so we'll speak briefly about the endocannabinoid system, mostly because it doesn't have much immediate relevance to what we're talking about. Okay, so these are the two cannabinoid receptors that we know about, CB1 and CB2. CB1 is expressed in the brain. CB2 is expressed in immune and hematopoietic tissues. These are transmembrane G protein-linked proteins. These are the two most populous endocannabinoids, and they bear essentially no resemblance to THC and CBD. We know that THC agonizes CB1 and CB2 receptors. We know that CBD does not. It's very unclear what cannabidiol does. There are many proposals, but none of these have had a compelling link to efficacy in epilepsy. Okay. So if we back up and just look online and ask, does cannabidiol work for pediatric epilepsy, you will get the immediate impression that it works. It works great, works fast, no side effects, it's a miracle. Occasionally you find someone that says it doesn't work. And then if you come to my pediatric epilepsy clinic, it didn't work, it didn't work, it didn't work. And then occasionally you'll see someone where it seemed to have worked. So I would say the vast majority of patients who have rolled through our clinic have not had success with these products, but occasionally we've had some folks who have had amazing success, where they have failed every therapy I could think of, and that they have responded within days, and that we've weaned off of their medications and they've remained seizure-free for years, and they are cognitively better, and they have EEGs with improvement read by folks who are marijuana skeptics. So how do we reconcile these things? So that was the big question. And what we set out to do was at least first do a really low-quality internet survey. So we surveyed folks who were frequenting online pediatric epilepsy and marijuana chat rooms and groups. And we just asked them, well, what did you give your kid? What happened? Did it work? What other medications were you on? What is your impression? What was the dose? And not unexpectedly, people were saying that it worked great. So when we looked at infantile spasms and Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, it was fantastically effective. And about 13% of kids were seizure-free. When we looked at Dravet syndrome, similar story. When we looked at all other forms of pediatric epilepsy, again, highly effective, and a significant minority were seizure-free. But this is internet reporting. This is anonymous. We don't know who these patients are. We had no way of confirming who they were or what those benefits were. So another group took a different tack. So in Colorado, they're kind of at the epicenter of medical and recreational marijuana. And they looked at patients who showed up in their emergency room, and they did an interesting comparison. They looked at patients who were Colorado natives versus those who had immigrated to Colorado in a desperate effort to obtain these products and use these products for treatment of their kids' epilepsy. And what did they see? Natives had about a 22% response rate. Immigrants to Colorado had a 47% response rate. Why could this be? Is it the altitude? People have proposed that, but no, this is clearly evidence of bias. But just because there is bias and that response rates are inflated doesn't mean that there isn't efficacy. So our job is to figure out how much of this is real and how much of it is bias.
Quick comment?
Sure.
So if you move to Colorado, you're not quite, you've probably got a greater motive to go there. I mean, you may be
Absolutely.
than if you're just a native.
Yes, absolutely. And your motivation to see benefit from any product that is potentially effective is greater. So this is kind of like a placebo-like effect.
You've got a different motive, but you're also like, you may be starting from a different position. So maybe your seizures are worse, maybe,
Absolutely possible. It may be that you've tried and failed more medications and that your odds of responding to any potentially effective therapy are lower at baseline. Definitely possible. Yeah. Okay, so is there any basic science evidence of benefit? Yes and no. So in models specifically of epileptic encephalopathy and infantile spasms, in models of Dravet syndrome, there's not great data, but those models are limited. And in more conventional models, there is evidence, actually. So there are dose-dependent responses across a variety of models. And this is called a rotorod. And the idea here is that you put the rat on this spinning cylinder, and you spin it, and you see how long they can hang on. And rats who are not intoxicated can hang on pretty good. But if you give them conventional anti-seizure drugs like phenytoin or phenobarbital, they tend to fall off sooner than you would expect. And if you give them cannabidiol, they don't fall off. So that's at least some basic evidence that it is not as compromising as conventional medications. The biggest data to date came in May of this year, so this was published in the New England Journal. It is a phase 3 clinical trial, randomized double-blind controlled study of cannabidiol for Dravet syndrome. And cutting to the chase, the benefit was statistically significant. we saw that cannabidiol was vastly more effective in reducing seizures. It was not maybe the miracle that you would believe if you only saw internet data, but there was clear benefit here. The problem, though, is that there may be an important drug interaction. So if you are taking a drug called clobazam or Onfi, it's a CYP2C19 substrate. Cannabidiol is a 2C19 inhibitor. So when you combine these, blood levels of Onfi and its active metabolite, norclobazam or N-desmethylclobazam, can rise. And this can produce increased efficacy and increased side effects. So the question is this difference here? Maybe this is because blood levels of clobazam have risen. This interaction is a little bit beguiling because expression of 2C19 varies a lot from patient to patient. Some patients will have a tremendous rise in their clobazam levels, and others will have no rise. So it's been a hard battle to sort this out. This potential interaction was not addressed in the publication. There is some data looking at Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, which looks fantastically similar, though this data is derived from a press release, not from a publication. So interpret it with caution, but the same caveat applies. We're wondering if this is a clobazam effect. In all of these studies, a lot of the patients, approximately 2/3, are taking clobazam. So this may all be confounded. So to sum up the pharmaceutical development of cannabidiol, there are several phase 3 studies that have been finished, but as you know, there's a big difference between completing phase 3 studies and obtaining FDA approval. So the jury's out. If you believe the press releases, approval is imminent. If you look at the data, you should be a little more circumspect. So in sum, there's a lot of data, some of it low quality, some of it high quality. Unfortunately, a lot of the low quality came from us. But I think there's a lot of questions. Safety is unknown, tolerability is not known, and efficacy has not been proven. Okay, but let's summarize these products. So when you think about marijuana that we believe existed in China 12,000 years ago, it had about a 50-50 mix of CBD and THC. When you look at marijuana today that's used for recreational purposes or for medical marijuana purposes, it's been enriched to have more and more THC because of the effects we talked about. It's very different than these community products that you can obtain in dispensaries, on the Venice Boardwalk, online, and these are CBD-enriched plants. So these are plants that have been bred to have lots and lots of CBD, as little THC as possible, and then all of the cannabinoids are extracted together. The products that are being developed on the pharmaceutical side, though, are nearly pure CBD. So the GW Pharma product is called Epidiolex, and it is derived from a CBD-enriched plant and then purified to about 99% pure CBD. Insys Therapeutics is developing a product that is known as cannabidiol oral solution, and it's a synthetic CBD, so pure. Okay, so thinking about risks, when we're in the clinic, how do we advise people in their use of these products? And the short answer is with great difficulty. There are a lot of problems. Number one, I didn't even list this here, is the cost. How much do these things cost? For what we believe to be an adequate dose, it's about $500 to $1,000 per month per patient. So these are not cheap. Insurance obviously does not cover these products. There's big issues with consistency. It's actually very hard to get a consistent extract from these plants, and that when we have tested the cannabinoid product, we see pretty dramatic swings in content. That this month there might be X amount of cannabidiol, next month there might be none, or twice as much as advertised. Shelf life is unknown. It's hard to test these products, quite honestly, because are we allowed to handle these products? Nope. Who is allowed to handle the products? Technically nobody. But what can you do? You can go online, and there are a whole bunch of companies that cater with the idea to know your medicine. And they will take a sample of your medical or recreational marijuana. It can be an extract. It can be a solid sample. It can be pretty much anything. So these are the two most popular, SC Labs and The Workshop, WERC. And they'll, for approximately $100, take a 10 to 15 milliliter sample of your extract and tell you what's in it. So they'll provide a report, and they'll show you the concentration of each cannabinoid. And for an additional fee, they can look at contaminants like infectious contaminants, pesticides, solvents from the extraction process. And there was actually, in 2015, there was a nice letter to the editor in JAMA looking at the consistency of edible products in Los Angeles, Seattle, and San Francisco. And they saw that most of these products were mislabeled, that the content of THC or CBD was often significantly different than the label. And they had used this lab to do their analyses. And then, like a month later, the lab got shut down, and the author of that letter was arrested. So think twice about doing this research. Now, I have not heard of him being convicted, and I think he's actually a pretty legitimate scientist, so there's a difference between arrest and conviction. Producing a controlled substance. Are there any medical risks? There is limited safety data. We do not have thousands and thousands of patients treated with the product. If there is a rare catastrophic side effect of high-dose cannabidiol, we may not know about it yet. There are lots of drug interactions, and we are only beginning to understand these, and there may be scores of complicated second-order or third-order interactions. This is a kind of a summary of drug interactions that's pretty limited and doesn't include the impact of the metabolite of clobazam. Okay, so lots of interactions, including with potentially very important drugs like blood thinners, like warfarin, with drugs that manage blood pressure. You do not want variation in your blood level of these drugs.
So was Onfi the only anti-epileptic it interacts with?
No, it's the only anti-epileptic that has a fantastically immense interaction. We have one particular patient who had a seemingly fantastic response to Epidiolex, who had a 20-fold increase in her levels of Onfi and its metabolite. The catch there, though, is the patient was already on a pretty good dose of Onfi, and we think that further titration of that drug alone would not have worked. So we've observed this huge rise in relevant blood levels, but it may just be coincidental in that even though that blood level rose fantastically, has nothing to do with the efficacy of the drug. Okay, so what does the DEA say? They have said and verified again and again that marijuana is not medicine, that it's a Schedule I drug, and specifically that it only has abuse potential and that there is no established medical benefit. So cultivation, distribution, possession, use is illegal unless you have a Schedule I DEA license. Okay, so despite that position, there has been some interest in the legislature. This is a libertarian and liberal collaboration, which is pretty rare these days. And although there was bipartisan support for this bill, Senate Bill 683, this was to deregulate cannabidiol, to specifically no longer include it in Schedule I designation, and to facilitate medical marijuana research. Although there was bipartisan support, there was greater bipartisan opposition. This bill died a terrible death, and it's actually still in the Senate Judiciary Committee, just lingering. Okay, so what do we need to do? We obviously need more research. We need folks to have the ability to do research, to have funding to accomplish it, and to have federal regulations that do not specifically discourage this research. We need to figure out how cannabidiol works, if it works. The mechanism is completely unknown. We need to know the best disease targets, meaning types of epilepsy or other CNS disorders that have the potential to benefit from these products. And to accomplish these aims, we need to advocate for reasonable, intelligent, rational regulation of these products. Okay, so what did we do? We continued it. We actually let them titrate it a bit. We didn't, in the note, tell them not to titrate it. And it stopped working after a while. Got the kid on regular drugs. He's doing pretty good. I called Senator Feinstein, who is, by the way, on the Senate Judiciary Committee that has letting that other bill die. And she said the following. Marijuana may have medicinal properties. I think it's good to do research. I support compassionate use, but she's not advocating for legislation that's going to make this happen. Okay, 1 minute. Let's do this one. 8-year-old girl, super refractory infantile spasms, Lennox-Gastaut syndrome. She's having 40 seizures a day, many of which are drop attacks where she falls to the ground. She's got lots of trauma, broken bones, broken facial bones. And her mom asks if we can recommend a CBD-enriched extract. She's failed every therapy I've offered. Am I going to prescribe Charlotte's Web? Refer her to a medical marijuana doctor? Get her into a clinical trial, maybe? Prescribe another medication which I think won't work? These are your options. Anybody for choice A? A couple hands. Refer her to a medical marijuana doctor, pass the buck, and put them in the care of somebody that maybe doesn't know what they're doing. Any votes? Oh, a couple votes. Ask her to.
Exactly, and enter a clinical trial and try another medication.
Okay, get her into a clinical trial. There's one for LGS. At the time I wrote this question, there was one for LGS. We were about to start at UCLA. I told her to wait. I actually chose option C. And what happened? She died a week later. She died of SUDEP. And I'm wondering to myself, oh gosh, what if we had tried it? Maybe it would have worked. Don't know. Okay, thank you for your attention. Sorry I went over.